I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time. Celia Palermo is with me, content producer with the PGA Tour. And it's funny because I've seen the way in which her career has blossomed since getting to know her in college. And it's no surprise to me how she's been able to engineer the success she has had. And we're going to talk about that success career-wise, learn about her life. This is her story, and we're going to talk about it on the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio, also a golf broadcaster. So Celia, I first of all, there's a pride that comes when, even if you watch an athlete before they get big time. And so for you, it's sort of like, I knew you when. It's sort of like that pride factor that comes into it. I wanted to start here. What do you think you've seen in yourself that's been the biggest reason for the way in which you've been able to navigate your career and have the success that you've had?
I think it starts first and foremost with the relationships that I've formed over my career. I hate the adage, it's not about like who you are, but who you know. That's true, but I also think it's about forming great personal relationships with people in this industry. This industry is so small. Sports is so small, as you know. And, I think I've been able to take some steps in my career based on forming connections with people every step of the way who have been willing to take a chance on me and give me a shot. And, without help of mentors and just different people along the way, that's kind of how I've taken my career trajectory.
So much of it, Celia, is obviously people giving you your shot, the relationships that you've talked about. But internally as well, there has to be this passion where you have to believe in yourself through all of this, through whatever rejection comes, whatever criticism comes, understanding that it is a subjective business. So how have you been so strong? And what we all need is that sort of inner strength to say, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep pushing. Like, where did that come from for you?
Right. I think it started for me with having a goal and a vision in mind of something that I've wanted to do since the get-go. And that has changed and shifted over the years. But I think it was learning, that all it takes is one yes. You're going to get a million no's along the ways. But the only thing that matters is finding who that yes is going to be from. And, I've been told no so many times in my career. It was very hard for me to break into this industry because I didn't have a great reel. I had, I had enough background. I had done internships and, worked at the TV station on campus at the University of Georgia where I went. But coming out of college, nobody wanted to hire me in sports. Literally no one. I did an interview with a station in market 100, I think, and was in a small town in Nebraska for a weekend sports reporter job. And I remember the person interviewing me say, look, you're not going to get a job in sports. Like, you're just not going to get one coming out of college. You need more experience. And I'm thinking to myself, they tell you to start small in this business, and I am starting small. I'm interviewing with the station. I'm not in the top 100. I'm shooting where I'm supposed to be shooting. For someone to tell me that, I was like, oh boy, this is going to be, a lot harder than I probably thought to get into sports. And I ended up connecting with a sports director in Augusta, Georgia, who said, I don't have any openings in sports. All I can tell you is if you take a news job here, reporting the news, maybe you can help out with our football production on Friday nights. And that was enough for me. And so finding that person who said, I don't have something for you now, but if it's something you want to do, maybe we can figure it out. That's all I wanted. I had one job offer coming out of school, and I don't think I was in a position to say no. So it ended up being a great opportunity.
From there, you go up to the Quad Cities, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And so what was that transition like for you? So you're Augusta, obviously, watching the way your reel has grown. I mean, you talk about, I'm looking at your command, the way you compose yourself in front of the camera now, and it's just like, oh my goodness, she's got so much talent. I don't know what those people in the past were thinking, but for you to find that going to the Quad Cities was the right thing to do, how did that all come together for you?
So I did I did 2 years in Augusta, like you mentioned, coming out of school, and through that time in Augusta, I was able to get a lot of experience in sports, and I ended up being kind of the go-to fill-in for our sports department. It also led to the opportunity of covering the Masters twice, first in 2018 and second in 2019. And, working, I knew I had an interest in golf coming into that station, but I don't think I realized how much passion I had for golf. And so getting the opportunity to cover the Masters told me, okay, wherever I go from here, because I don't want this to be my first and last stop, I need to
Yeah.
be in a station and in a market with a golf tournament. And so I searched every single local news market in the country that was reasonable for me to make my second jump to. And the Quad Cities was one of them. They host the John Deere Classic. And it's one of the more underrated events on the PGA Tour, in my opinion. And I ended up really clicking with the two gentlemen in the sports department there. It was a 3-person department. And they gave me a shot, and I think I'd been working at the station for a month by the time the John Deere Classic came around, and we were ready to rock. And it was like my Super Bowl. Golf tournament weeks are like my Super Bowl. I love it. So that's how I got to the Quad Cities, golf.
So you start working on shows golf related there in the Quad Cities, and obviously it's such a passion of yours. When you look back at some of your greatest moments, just even in the Quad Cities, covering the John Deere Classic and doing the golf shows, what does that mean to you if you go back to the person that was looking for any opportunity coming out of college to say that, look what I did? I like for you, you still have so much more in front of you and will accomplish. But just sort of in this small sample size, to be able to turn around what could have been, very disheartening, and then use it as motivation. Like, how much have you had the opportunity to just, even in these couple of years, to reflect on how you've turned things around?
It's crazy. When I was in the Quad Cities and my contract was coming up, I wasn't sure what was next for me. I wanted it to be golf, but I hadn't dreamed big enough to think that I could work at the PGA Tour. I thought that was way off in the distance, didn't know opportunities existed. So when I think back on, coming out of school, people saying, you don't have enough experience, you're not going to get a job in sports, to, my first job, them really not being committal to having me do sports, to even at that first job, managers trying to put me into a news position. And that's not really what I wanted, to jump ahead a couple of years and then realize that I would be anchoring a 30-minute golf show live on scene, at a tournament just 2 years later. I mean, it was crazy to think about, because I was so used to being pigeonholed into something that I didn't want to do, because everyone was sick of hearing this person is coming out of school and they want to do sports. Because, Bryan, as you know, this industry is very popular. Everyone wants to do it. And I think when I came into the industry, a lot of managers were not enthused that everyone coming out of school wanted to do sports. So it became an opportunity that I feel very lucky to have had in the Quad Cities. And I couldn't have imagined it, coming out of school.
Well, it couldn't, this transformation from college to where you are now couldn't happen to a better and hardworking person. Celia Palermo is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. And I love the way, and this is what I wanted to canvas in this conversation, Celia, is the fact that, like, so many times those who are decision makers, like you use the word pigeonhole, and I think that's perfect. They have a certain idea of where somebody is supposed to go, but that's one person's opinion. And the fact is, while you acknowledge what they said, you had a different perception of yourself, and you were able to say, thanks, but I've got other plans. And you were able to take that and go with it. On the other hand, you could have said, okay, I guess that's where I'm going. But you had other motives, and you had dreams that you wanted to ultimately get done. And now that you're at the PGA Tour, being able to be inside the ropes, if you will, what do you get to see that folks who are fans of the sport don't get to see as much? Understanding the access, the relationships that you've developed since working there.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I feel very lucky that I get to see the best in this game up close and personal, a couple of feet from me, get to talk to them, get to learn their stories, get to tell their stories. I think first and foremost, what people don't realize is that, athletes in every single sport, they are just like us. They're people, they have hobbies, they have interests, they have things that they really like to do in their free time other than their sport. And I think that's something that you can't always translate on the camera, but it's something that we try to do a lot here at the PGA Tour is tell a player's story off the course, what they do, their background, things like that. And so I think it's been great to get to know some of the great athletes in this sport, but I'm still very new at this. Travelers is actually going to be my first on-site tournament for producing content. I was just at a senior event, the PGA Tour Champions KitchenAid Senior PGA Championship, a couple of weeks ago. So I did them, but now I get to do full-fledged PGA Tour in a couple of weeks or in next week.
So you getting to do that, how do you envision that's going to be like, as far as obviously you get there, you are going to be putting on, the show, the interviews, the storytelling. When I watch that, Celia, how am I going to know it is a Celia Palermo production?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I don't know. I think because I worked on a production similar to this, so for some background, when I go to Travelers, I will be helping produce a network special, which will air on CBS or on Golf Channel, about the Travelers, about what happens that week and things like that. So we're aiming for long form features, and we'll tell the golf action and things like that. So, I think the thing that I try to do each story that I tell is I want to make the subject, the player, feel comfortable to be themselves. And I want to keep things light and loose. I want to evoke emotion. So I don't know if I have a trademark yet, but that's certainly the goal is that kind of thing. But
when
high
you're
energy, emotion, yeah.
when you're doing that, what are some of, like, if you're in the situation where you have to interview, what is your way? I know you're getting interviewed here, but now I'm, asking you about interviewing. So it's like it's kind of an interesting dynamic of this conversation, but the ways in which, to your point, you make the interviewee comfortable, you make them feel at home, at ease, because then that's when you get some of the great sound bites, you get the emotion that comes out too.
Right. I think back to an interview I did at the KitchenAid Senior PGA Championship a couple of weeks ago. We were doing a feature on a guy who was a club professional for 30 years before he won PGA Tour Champions Q School in the fall to get PGA Tour champion status. So he's a really interesting story. He's been grinding for his whole life and finally got professional status just a couple months ago, really. And so I knew I needed to talk to him about what it meant to be there, the emotions of playing on PGA Tour champions. He's waited his whole life for this. How does he show that he belongs? But the way that I start that conversation after he's just played 18 holes is not by diving right into that. The way I feel I make a player comfortable is I ask about the easy stuff. I ask about, how do you think you played? Tell me about this birdie on this hole. And you let that take you into the harder stuff and the more emotional stuff. And, that conversation led to me asking what it meant to have his 17-month-old baby on site, watching him play, and his 8-year-old daughter and his wife being there, getting to witness him live out this dream. And that question ended up, evoking some tears. But to get there, we had to build up. And I think that's something that I'm sure you understand as well, is, it's a build up, it's a climax, and you have to start with the stuff that'll get them loose and easy to talk to.
You're absolutely right. It's developing that comfort, that rapport makes all the difference. And you don't just throw the tough questions right away. Celia Palermo is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. So let me turn this around now. You're doing features for others. If there was a feature on you, what
Oh
would you
no.
what would you want to make sure was included in that feature?
Oh gosh. That's a really good question and a really tough question. I don't know. I think an important part of my story is, you know, thinking about the women in this industry who came before, who allowed women like myself to pursue a career path. And I think that's an important part of the story is, you know, so many people are still unfortunately getting used to seeing women in prominent roles in sports. And so I'd want people to understand in my story that women belong, and women can know just as much about golf, about basketball, about football as any man can. And they can, you know, do it well, and they belong at the table. That's what I love about golf so much is, you know, golf, unlike a lot of sports, both men and women can play, and they can play very well. And not only at the professional level, but on the recreational level too. So I have my clubs. I can go play an afternoon 9 after work if I want to. And, you know, I can understand the nuances of the game at a certain level the same way that a man in my same position can. And so I think that would be something that I would want a viewer to understand about my story is a lot of people will underestimate you and think you don't belong, but you do.
How much of feeling that way, in that you understand those who came before you, but also understanding the role you play for those that are in the next generation,
Right.
not to use the word pressure, or maybe it's pride, but how do you feel like you want to be sort of that ambassador for others too, and what you need to do that as well?
You know, I think a lot of it, luckily on social media, we've seen people be able to speak about, you know, inequities in sports. And I think it's been a powerful tool. You know, so often before, you know, people in my generation came up in this industry, you know, you would see women in these roles, but it wasn't spoken about on the same equal footing in a lot of ways. But I think, you know, my generation being able to have the power to talk about, you know, some of the challenges of this industry have been huge because we've been able to make sports a more welcoming environment for people of all backgrounds. And that's, you know, I do feel when I connect with young women who are still in college, wanting to come up in this industry, I think it's my job to make them feel welcome and feel like they have a seat at the table and that they can make mistakes doing this and still know that they have what it takes to do this, and that no matter what other people say about how they make those mistakes and about how they grow, that doesn't mean they're not cut out for it.
There are so many times where this business can be viewed as cutthroat,
Yeah.
but there's only a finite number of people like yourself who sort of step outside themselves the way in which you do, the extent in which you do, to help others. And that's another part of why I wanted to have you on, to show that, in that you are in this field, and not only are you thriving and growing, but that you continuously are reaching a hand out for others. And that is the essence of who you are. I wanted to leave you with this last question. Celia Palermo is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. You brought up your own golf game.
Oh God.
So let's go there. In that, what is the best shot in the bag you have?
Bryan, I gotta tell you, I mean, for years I've been obsessed with golf and have loved golf, but I didn't pick up a set of clubs till I got this job in November of 2021. So I don't think I have a best shot, but I will say I did make my very first bogey, and I mean this in a good way because a bogey is a good score for me right now. I made a bogey on a par 3 at a course here in Ponte Vedra area, and yeah, it felt good. I hit 8-iron off the tee, wedge into the green, kind of went too far down the slope, had to hit the wedge back onto the green, and then made the putt, probably like a 6-footer to make bogey. So not too bad.
It's only going to get better from there. And soon you're not just going to hit an 8-iron off the tee, but you're going to have pars with a driver and sort
Oh,
of
no.
to.
Driver is my worst club. I'm 5 feet tall, and even a petite women's set of clubs, the driver shaft is too long for me. It's bad. I have petite clubs, but they're still too long.
You know what? I still think you can do it. And
Thank you.
to sort of parlay off the driver, you have been a great driver for women in sports media,
Thank you.
and highlighting you has been something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And I really appreciate your transparency and your story and how much it motivates others. Celia Palermo, content producer, PGA Tour. Excited to see your work at the Travelers Championship. I'm Bryan Fenley. Thanks so much for doing this.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Bryan.